For centuries, the vast Russian economy remained largely isolated, its riches confined within its borders. Agricultural pursuits and internal trade dominated the landscape, with limited participation in the global economic sphere. Around the turn of the 18th century, a period of modernization began under the Tsars, most notably Peter the Great. This era witnessed a strategic push towards increased trade with European nations. Russia began exporting raw materials such as furs, timber, and agricultural products. Imagine, if you will, a brisk trade in furs akin to the ones adorning winter hats flowing westward. These efforts marked a positive step, but Russia still lagged behind its European counterparts. The early 20th century ushered in a period of profound change. The political and social upheaval of the revolution led to a new economic focus: industrialization. The government prioritized the development of factories and heavy industry, aiming to transform Russia into a major industrial power. Envision towering smokestacks and the clamor of machinery replacing the pastoral scenes of the past. While this strategy yielded progress, Russia continued to play catch-up with the more industrialized nations. The devastation of World War II necessitated a period of reconstruction. The Soviet economic model that emerged emphasized state-controlled, large-scale industries. Imagine industrial complexes employing entire towns, a testament to the scale of Soviet ambition. This approach propelled the Soviet Union to superpower status. However, the inherent inflexibility of the system limited its long-term economic dynamism. Today, Russia finds itself at a crossroads. The state's control over the economy has waned, and the nation seeks to reintegrate into the global economic system. Following the initial sanctions over Crimea in 2014, preparations for Russia's invasion of Ukraine began well in advance of the invasion itself, which commenced in 2022. Russia accumulated a sizable reserve of $600 billion over time in an effort to lessen the effects of any potential military-related sanctions. However, half of that reserve disappeared almost immediately due to the weight of extraordinary sanctions. Putin intended to use these reserves to keep the economy stable during wartime, but the West retaliated by preventing any access to these funds. To be honest, Putin had no clue that the West would unite so rapidly, and he certainly had no concept that Western countries would be willing to risk everything to condemn Russia. When Putin annexed Crimea in 2014, international sanctions were comparatively light because of the United States' only strong hand in exerting pressure on Russia. Few would have guessed that a more widespread invasion would be met with such a powerful response. Due to its inability to access its war chest, Russia was forced to take extraordinary measures in order to maintain its economy. It first declared that, albeit initially only for a few days, its stock market would be closed for weeks. The Russian stock market reopened at the end of March, allaying investors' anxieties about selling all of their holdings. In addition, the Russian central bank raised interest rates by an astounding 20% in order to offset the significant loss in the ruble, which fell as much as 40% after the invasion. In March, inflation surged to 16.7% in spite of this effort, a sharp contrast to the US rate of 8.54%. Prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Russia was confronted with serious economic difficulties. It struggled with a crisis in 2015 to 2016, brought on by a sharp decline in oil prices and global sanctions. In contrast to other economies, Russia's economy is primarily dependent on oil and gas, which account for 60% of GDP and 40% of state revenue, according to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. Some of the world's largest deposits of gas, oil, and minerals, all vital to modern industry, are found within Russia's vast landmass. Russia's 40% export revenue comes from oil and gas resources, demonstrating the country's economic reliance on these resources. For instance, the enormous oil resources of Siberia and the enormous gas reserve in the Arctic region have significant impact on Russia's economic output. However, this abundance comes with a cost. Due to its lack of economic diversification, Russia leads industrialized nations' charts of wealthy disparity even when its citizens make billionaires. Think about the oligarchs who have amassed huge wealth from their oil and gas revenues, while large segments of the population struggle to make ends meet while living in rural poverty with little prospects for employment other than resource exploitation. Moreover, Russia is vulnerable to foreign influence and economic sabotage due to its reliance on natural resources. Russia has aggressively opposed Western renewable energy initiatives to safeguard its interests. It even supports campaigns aimed at undermining efforts to use renewable energy. Germany is practically helpless as a result of this dependence, as evidenced by its reluctance to hold Russia responsible for its actions in Ukraine and its reluctance to support a complete ban on Russian energy imports due to fear for the effects on its own economy. The financial crisis of 2014 to 2016, which caused large sums of money to leave the Russian economy as investors lost faith in the currency, took 2 years for Russia to recover from. All of this, though, began as an economic crisis and has now grown into a major disaster with long-lasting effects. Putin has spent the last 20 years turning Russia's budding market economy into a command economy akin to the Soviet Union in an effort to gain more control over the economy. The cliche, "you can't teach an old dog new tricks," is accurate, even in cases where the tricks are obviously useless. Putin turned his attention to Yukos, the biggest oil business in Russia, which at one point produced 20% of all oil produced in the nation. In 2003, Putin came up with a plan to take over the corporation directly. At first, fictitious tax invoices were created, claiming that Yukos has avoided paying $27 billion in taxes, an amount that the business was unable to resolve. This was just what Putin wanted, because he immediately imposed a freeze on all of Yukos' assets and started the process of the government seizing of those assets to pay off the alleged tax deficit. Subsequently, those assets were sold to state-owned enterprises at extremely low prices, and Putin personally oversaw their quick utilization. For example, important infrastructure such as pipelines and oil refineries were purchased for a small portion of its true value, enabling these state-owned businesses to greatly expand their operations. Consider Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was imprisoned for 11 years after being charged with fraud. After being free, Khodorkovsky left the nation and started to criticize Putin openly. Towing the line means you could lose everything to Putin's iron grip. This was the message delivered to the other oligarchs. In the oil sector, Rosneft and Gazprom became the major players, and Putin had complete control over their enormous revenues. Putin reportedly received an undisclosed amount of money from these state-owned behemoths, putting him in the running to be the richest person on the globe. Putin, meanwhile, used these businesses to pay bribes to his friends in the Russian security services. Putin now had direct access to the hated Russian security agencies, and Putin's allies received millions of dollars in compensation. Because of this, Putin was very powerful and was able to deploy Russia's security forces for a variety of purposes, including executing or frightening political opponents and critics. It's likely that anyone who defied Putin's authoritarian methods were already under his control or would soon face the prospect of being executed or coerced into doing anything. Putin strengthened his hold on key sectors of the Russian economy, such as energy. Those who supported his ideas went on to launch successful companies like Sibur and Novatek. However, because to Russia's extreme bureaucracy and corruption, anyone who disobeyed Putin's commands found it difficult to conduct business there. Due to this, foreign businesses were less likely to visit, exacerbating the economy's issues. In the aftermath of the global financial crisis in 2014 to 2016, Putin intensified his efforts to fortify his economic position. The government put pressure on independent businesses to sell when they achieved a certain level of success. One of the largest grocery retailers in Russia, Magnit, felt compelled to sell to the government. In return for a sizable payment of $2.5 billion, the company's founder, Sergei Galitsky, gave up the majority of its shares. While some caved into Putin's demands, others risked being detained or expelled on spurious accusations. Small and medium-sized enterprises might still prosper in the face of the Kremlin's strict economic controls, but they need to exercise caution. Given the favorable diplomatic relations between Russia and the West, numerous Western corporations like Nestle, IKEA, H&M, and Adidas seize the opportunity to cater to the expanding middle class in Russia, so contributing to the economic growth of the nation. However, as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, an unprecedented exodus of foreign companies has occurred, with an estimated $200 billion in economic losses for Russia. Well-known companies that had operations in Russia, such as Nestle, British American Tobacco, and Philip Morris, have terminated or reduced them. For example, Nestle stopped selling the majority of its imported products, while British American Tobacco pulled out of the Russian market entirely. In addition, sales of popular items like tracksuits have been banned in Russia by TJX, H&M, Nike, and Adidas. Moreover, the economic impact has been exacerbated by the withdrawal of major international participants from the Russian financial industry. Russian lenders suffered a $3.3 billion loss after Societe Generale sold its interest in Rosbank, and Deutsche Bank is closing its branches in the country. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase severed their connections with Russia in a similar manner. Furthermore, Russian travelers are now much more severely hampered by the decisions made by American Express, MasterCard, and Visa to prohibit card usage outside of Russia. The departure of foreign companies has caused hundreds of thousands of jobs to be lost and increased unemployment to almost 9% from a record low in March. The Russian government has set aside 39 billion rubles, or $466 million, for emergency assistance, temporary jobs, and public works projects in an effort to lessen the economic impact of the 10% decline in retail sales. Although this approach is similar to what the US did during the 2008 financial crisis, it is unclear what effect it will have in the long run. Russia, with 144 million people, is allotted just 466 million, which is a pitiful financial state made worse by the exodus of international companies and investment. The Kremlin has taken control of numerous companies that were formerly run by foreigners in an effort to offset the effects of Western companies leaving. Uncle Vanya's, a state-owned restaurant business, is set to replace McDonald's locations with no regard for intellectual property rights. However, the limited resources brought about by frozen foreign deposits could make this strategy fail. Furthermore, replacing foreign-run companies with local counterparts just ignores important aspects like brand loyalty and competence. The government's disrespect for intellectual property rights discourages potential international investment as well, which hurts Russia's chance for innovation and development. Over the following year, the Russian economy is expected to contract by 11%, reviving the economic hardships of the Soviet era. This downturn is made worse by the flight of skilled workers, especially in STEM disciplines, which further clouds Russia's economic prospects. Russia faces economic isolation unless Putin reverses direction and wins international pardon for the invasion of Ukraine. Despite possible energy commerce with Asian countries like India, Russia's decline will be accelerated by Western sanctions aimed at its oil sector, which is its economic cornerstone. Russia essentially faces a dismal future as a secondary European country, its economy reliant on a contracting energy sector and few opportunities for expansion.